We are live. Amazing. So welcome everyone to this virtual town hall. We haven't done one in a while and I'm hyper excited. It's going to be amazing. Let me just do a bit of housekeeping before we get this underway. In this virtual town hall, we will look at the climate crisis, but for once, it will not be depressing. It will be a positive looking at best practices, at great companies, at amazing activists type of virtual town hall, where we actually end up being hopeful. At least that's my hope for this virtual town hall in the midst of COP. And let me introduce everyone in the Zoom call before doing a bit of housekeeping. I'm joined, I'm Colombe, by the way, that's my name, and I'm one of the co-founders of Atlas. I'm joined by Marco here, who's a key volunteer in our climate campaign, and Willem, who is the founder of Sustainable Public Affairs. And we'll talk about this more, but he's actually doing something perfect for this town hall, which is he's working with companies that are doing great in terms of environmental standards and trying to up the norm. And that's great because we are looking at the bright side of how to solve the climate crisis. And just before we get into it, because we will have 100,000 questions, the reason for it, which we are hosting this virtual town hall, is we just launched a campaign at Atlas called Ban Fossil Fuel Subsidies. Fossil fuel are a mess. They are responsible for 89%, if I'm not mistaken, to CO2 emissions. And by cutting subsidies, we could cut CO2 emissions by a third. So it's time to do it. And before we jump into the questions and you get to ask all of them, please use the chat function on Zoom and the Q&A function on Zoom if you are on the Zoom call right now to ask all of your questions, send us your thoughts, your ideas, challenge us, that's the whole point, and do the same on social media. We are live streaming on Facebook and our amazing social media manager, Zoe, will be bringing in the questions, debating with you, and holding us accountable for actually answering them. So please make sure you ask as many questions as possible. I'm done speaking. Welcome, Willem and Marco. The mic is yours.
Thanks, Colombe. And thanks for the introduction and hello, William, and thanks for participating today. So we thought to do this conversation on three main areas, and then we'll change the conversation depending on also other questions coming from the audience and everything. But first of all, since we launched a campaign on fossil fuels, we would like to talk about fossil fuels and learn a little bit more also from your experience about this topic. And then we would like to learn a little bit more about companies that lead by example as well in this area. And so we like to have a conversation a little bit about that. So let's start on the first part, so on the fossil fuels. So just to make it clear to everyone, and also someone that doesn't have a good understanding on the topic, would like just know what are fossil fuels first of all, and are we subsidizing fossil fuels in Europe? So if you can briefly tell us about this, if on this first question.
Yeah, no, of course, very happy to be here. Thanks for the good questions, Marco. Thanks for setting this up, Colombe. And you know that from the very first moment, I was a big fan of everything that you guys are doing with Andrea. I think it is a very positive endeavor, Atlas, the movement that you're creating. And I hope to be approaching things from a positive side today as well. Before we dive into the topic, I think it's good to just tell a bit about myself and what I do, because it will give you also a bit of a better frame of my outlook and the way I look at fossil fuels, the way I look at subsidies, etc. So, as I think Colombe already said, I founded 1.5 years ago on the 1st of January 2020. So more than 1 year and a half ago, I founded Sustainable Public Affairs. And Sustainable Public Affairs is a lobbying agency, right? It's a public affairs agency, and we're very proud to be that. There's a lot of public affairs and lobby agencies here in Brussels, but there's one difference between them and us, and that is that we are the first one to be a purpose-driven public affairs agency that has committed itself to only take on cases that have a positive impact on the environment. We believe that being a lobbyist or doing public affairs is a very sort of privileged profession. We're operating very close to policymakers, and we are one of the last people to have a say on the regulation and the policy that is shaping the worlds of our children. So we're in a very delicate position, and I think that you can't do this work, you can't do this profession if you're not completely in line with the sort of world that you're actually advocating for through the advice that you're giving, through the work that you're doing on a paid-for basis by your clients. So it's not a free-for-all game, and I think you need to be ultra prudent in what sort of cases you bring on, because otherwise you're having a bit of a free ride on the society of tomorrow for a very small sum, being your salary, right? So I think that goes for public affairs and lobbying, but it also goes much wider. I mean, if you're at a strategic consultancy, or if you're at a communications agency, if you have a newspaper, what do you lend yourself for? And how can you determine what you feel is contributing to the world you would want to see for your children and the children of your children? So I think that we are on a very interesting verge of what I have come to call contractor activism, right? If you want to hire a strategy consultant, public affairs consultant, or an accountant for that matter, I think those actors in a larger scheme of things, they should step up the plate and take much more responsibility for the sort of stuff that they're doing, for the advice that they're giving. And that's, I think, a bit of context behind sustainable public affairs. I found that that was completely absent in the world of public affairs and lobbying. And that is why I started Sustainable Public Affairs, with the idea to only take on and further the interest of cases that have a positive impact on the environment. Now, often people ask us, okay, what is then sustainable? And I'm coming to slowly to fossils, Marco, so don't worry.
No, don't worry, absolutely. It's great to hear about your story and as well the background. So yeah, go for that.
Cool. So then often people ask us, okay, what is sustainable? You know, what is, how do you define it? And the world we're living in and operating in here in Brussels, operating close to policymakers, right? It's all about definitions, right? It's all about being precise and accurate. So we've given that some thought, and we have drafted a sustainability charter, and that has actually 4 sort of steps as a methodology to define what we think is sustainable. First of all, we think that we would only want to make sure that our people are working on cases in sectors that can actually make a difference, right? As a positive difference. So in that sense, we have also, and you can find it on our website, sustainablepublicaffairs.com, we have decided not to work for the interest of fossil fuels. But there's also loads of other sectors that we think don't necessarily contribute to a more sustainable tomorrow. And with sustainable, we really mean environmentally sustainable. Think about smoking, gambling, arms, what have you, right? By the way, I saw a very interesting article the other day about the carbon footprint of armies, but let's not go down a rabbit hole. But anyhow, so the first sort of thing that we focus on is, are we operating in a sector that can make a positive difference? So in that sense, anyone related to fossil fuel industry would already sort of phase itself out. If you are in a sector that can make a difference, for example, green hydrogen, we only want to work with the people that are actually performing better than the EU norms prescribe. And we call them sustainable frontrunners, right? People that are going the extra mile, people that are farther ahead than what the sort of EU minimums are. So that is the second step. The third step is, if you do that, you need to agree to us doing only positive lobbying, positive public affairs. We're not here to work for or get you any exemptions, right? We're not here for watering down targets. We're only here to make sure that we make the performance of sustainable frontrunners the norm for the rest of the industry. And that is a positive sort of advocacy that we're doing. And the fourth thing is that you need to be a chilled out, positive person to work with, which is to make sure that the people we work with look forward to the goals that they have with the clients, and work also with sort of positive peers on the other side of the line, because ultimately advocacy is something that you really do together with the clients. So that is a bit our methodology to make sure that we only lend our hearts and minds of the brilliant people I've come to work with, who are my colleagues in sustainable public affairs, that they work on the cases that we think create a better tomorrow. Fossils is not one of those, but the interest of the fossil industry or fossil related interests are of course very predominant in the work that we do. Because imagine, and these are all sort of real life cases, imagine that you are that you want to make steel not with coke and coal, which are also fossils, right? Everybody thinks only about petchem, right? Petrochemicals, or oil, or other sorts of fossils. But let's face it, I think coal and other sorts of hydrocarbons that are in the ground are also are very much also fossils. So trying to come to you, Marco, with what fossils actually are. Now, fossils are much bigger and broader than only your sort of your oil, right? And your oil drilling. I think that is one thing. But if you are trying to make a fossil-free steel, so you try to make that with green hydrogen, which is made with renewable electricity, wind power, for example. Of course, then the interests of fossil, or the fossil interests, come at play, because you are actually competing with fossil-driven technologies and processes. And the first value of sustainable public affairs is that we're always positive. So we don't want to sort of ride our high horse and be negative about what other people are doing. I think people have their legitimate interest in having done what they have done. I think we all come to a point now where we see that it is time to change the course. So we can speak further, and I'll stop here for you all to come in, but we can speak further about fossil interests that we see on our radar working for sustainable frontrunners, as they have to compete with people that are dependent on fossils. And I think that competition is absolutely skewed and is also maintained by subsidies that those competitors to our sustainable frontrunners get. So that's a bit, sorry for taking so long, but that's a bit the landscape that we are operating in. And I thought just good for you guys to know.
No, I think that's perfect. Thanks so much, Willem. And it's also, to be honest, it's one of the reasons for which we invited you here, right? Because you are working with companies. And, in this sector, we often tend to see companies as the big, bad, and ugly in climate change, those responsible. But you're working with front runners that are often competing with fossil fuel industry. And I remember in one of our calls, you mentioned some of the best practices of energy reliant companies you're working with that are managing to do better than this. So I want to get to this in just a second. Just to bring it back to basics for everyone. We talked about Willem's job. He's helping companies, not the greenwashing one, but the ones that are actually doing better, up the norm so that we have better norms when it comes to the environment, and that's great. We then moved on to fossil fuels. I added on Zoom what fossil fuels are. I can't pronounce all of those words, by the way, so I'll just pronounce a few. But fossil fuels include coal, petroleum, natural gas, and then others. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it in English, so I won't try. And we talked about subsidies because, as Willem mentioned, some of the companies that are trying to use more green sources have to compete with fossil fuels that are subsidized. And by subsidies, we mean either direct subsidies, so some governments give directly money to the fossil fuel industry, but also indirect ones. So they benefit from a lot of other advantages like tax breaks and so on. So there are different types of subsidies. I just wanted to kind of explain this to lay the grounds for us all to be on the same page. And before we ask some of the next questions, I'm just reading some of the comments. One was, what is sustainable public affairs? You addressed this, and someone said that you have a very cool t-shirt with them, so I'm relaying the information in case we're wondering. Another one is, it sounds like a very positive company with them. We need more of this, and it's Kevin from South Africa. And we have a few other questions I'll get to in just a second. First, I know you don't work directly with the fossil fuel industry, but considering the fact that you work with some of the competitors, can you tell us why, as a society, we are so reliant on fossil fuels? And then we can address how to move away from it and your experience with it.
Yeah. So don't hate me for trying to be a bit fair here, right? I think fossil has brought society to a large extent to where it is today, with a lot of benefits, but also with a lot of drawbacks. The benefits have been clear from the start. The drawbacks begin to really appear now to the larger audience, right? So I think that is the frame we're operating in. So you can't maybe be as harsh on people that worked with fossils in the past as you could be today, right? That's one thing. The second thing is, the predecessor of the European Commission was the Union for Coal and Steel, right? It was an economic agreement between Germany and France to keep each other in check. It was an agreement that was built on the havoc that was caused by the Second World War. That was then very predominantly on the mind of the people. And they thought, as long as we intertwine the markets and the economic interests with each other, we will be too interdependent on each other to let war happen again, right? So I just wanted to make sure that I put out those two comments. And I put it out because I think we are at a point in time where we need to make a second step. From the point we were at in sort of Europe 1.0, so to say, trying to keep everybody together to fight war, I think we have now come to a much closer knit sort of economic union. And if we want to survive, there's only one way forward, and that is to, as a bloc, try to take advantage of the next big mega trend, and that is sustainability. And that means that it's also in the social interest of people of Europe, to phase out fossil. Why? Because I think that the next breakthrough innovations, the next Googles, if you want, are in clean tech. The know-how, the IP, the patents, everything that is going to be hot because it's going to save the world is going to be about sort of GHG and greenhouse gas abatements. And if we create a conducive environment to doing the R&D for that in Europe, and also scaling up the R&D in Europe and not in the US like we had with the .com mega trend, right? Or with other manufacturing that has been offshore to other parts in the world. I think it's in the interest of everybody now, including the fossil fuel industry, that we go to a very quick phase out of, in any case, the subsidies or the benefits or the funds that are being made available to further invest in that sector. So I think not only from my perspective, but from everybody's perspective, from a European perspective, from a civil society perspective, this is very important. And I can talk a bit about our clients later on, but I think a bit of historic understanding as to where we stood and where we stand today is very important to have a nuanced conversation.
Willem, I think you are muted for some reason. The last part of the sentence was muted, sorry.
Okay, I think I don't know how it happened. I think
until you said it's very nuanced, and then
yeah, it's very nuanced, and I think we need a historic understanding to judge better where we stand today, but also to plot a way forward, right? So I just wanted to make sure at the beginning of this call to give that, and I think it provides a very fertile soil for building out a very quick phase out of in any case fossil fuel subsidies, and with that hopefully fossil fuels altogether, right? Because it's in that chronology.
Yeah, so Willem, so I think that this is very cool, and thanks for this explanation. In particular, like the challenge, I mean, the future innovations that are coming, you think that are coming and that are in this industry. So, and I agree with you. I believe that this is going to be the future. But meanwhile, what do you think are the challenges to move? So I think that one of the biggest problems is the transition, right? So, and we are seeing in the last days and weeks about issues with the crisis for gas or for other type of prices. So what do you think are other like challenges in this transition while we are kind of building and adopting these these technologies that will help us to to transition to this new world that is made with sustainable technologies?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question. So I completely stand behind your guys' strive to phase out subsidies for fossil, right?
Yeah.
And that should be the first thing before phasing out fossil. You can't phase out fossil overnight, right? Because we're all too dependent on it, unfortunately, because our society was built up like that at the moment, right? But so we need to free up the funds to flow to clean tech innovations, to green steel, to sort of fossil-free steel, sorry, to green hydrogen, to low carbon building materials, whatever, right? So we need to stimulate those markets, those nascent markets, to come to fruition in Europe and to flourish in Europe. So I think that is important. Why we have such a lot of difficulties doing that, and that's your question, is one, because we've always done things like that. Yeah. Second, because the European Union is a construct that has been not set up for the climate, but it has been set up as a sort of a peacekeeper in intertwining economic interests. And it hasn't been, I think that the main difficulty is that harm to the environment has never been really put an economic value to, right? So we've always had this economic union, and we have very carefully up till now disregarded the fact that harm to the environment also has an economic value to it. So it has been out of the equation for a long time, and you see it now coming in sideways, right? But it has, in an economic construct like the European Commission, harm to the environment has not been a factor to reconcile it. And that we see that now coming with the Green Deal, fortunately, et cetera, et cetera. So that is, I think, the second thing. It's just been very hard to fathom and to calculate what the harm is to the environment of fossils. It's different. It's difficult stuff for accountants. It's difficult stuff for policymakers. How can you actually calculate for the harm that's being done? How can you operationalize it? How can you? In Brussels, they say if you cannot measure it, you cannot control it. So how can you measure it? And what price do you put to it? So these are all sort of interesting things that are coming out. And the third thing why it's been so difficult is that for a long time, interest groups in Brussels, lobby groups in Brussels, but also the European Commission and European Parliament for parts themselves have thought, well, maybe we can better move along with the fossil industry than actually sort of step out of their interest and work against them, right? So I think consciously or unconsciously, people have sort of opted for a very pacifistic, chilled out, relaxed way of trying to move along with that industry with the argument that if we're not on board of that industry, if we're not working together with that industry, we can't change it. And there, my friends, I think you see a big difference today.
Yeah.
You saw a lot of the funds, the investment funds. You've seen now 3 Point with Shell, Loib. You've seen others recently that have said, you know what, we're completely done with sort of moving along with sort of incremental innovation and doing just not enough to actually get there. We're just going to step out and then we're going to see what happens. And I think that is something we're going to see more of, from not only from the investment side of things, but also maybe from the policy side of things. We do it from a public affairs side of things. We're not moving along gently with the current and trying to bend things in an incremental way. Now, we now have to stop because, and then I stop, Colombe, we're entering a different stage of policy making where we're not longer forecasting, as we have done always, right? We've tried to forecast not getting into war again. That was the whole construct of the European Union, but we're now backcasting. We're working our way back from 2030. We're working our way back from 2050. And that gets a whole different dynamic into policymaking. It also gets a whole different dynamic into funding, right? It gets a different dynamic into everything. We're going to do everything upside down because we're going to backcast things instead of forecasting our way into the dark. And that is, I think, what is going to be a major game changer. And that's also what's going to do away with fossil fuel subsidies in a short amount of time. And we've seen the beginnings of it with the European Investment Bank and a couple of pledges of European companies. So I think that is sort of to give some more perspective. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, I think it's amazing, and I'm trying to hold myself from being hyper negative in response, thanks to because of my commitment to be positive. So just to quickly recap before my next question, I think you touched on something that we're working a lot on at Atlas right now, which is value in a way. So you mentioned how until recently, in the way we measure the economy impact and so on, we didn't take into consideration the cost on the environment of fossil fuels. And I think that's very true. I think it's still kind of the case often, right? So we talk a lot about, climate change and the fact that we're doomed if we don't take action and all of this. But when you look, for example, at how governments propose their budgets or policies or ahead of elections, politicians tend to be very green, but still in their policies, the environment is not taken into account in most policies proposed. So I think it's still something that we really must change along the way. And as a result, I think if we were to do it, we would phase out fossil fuel subsidies. And indeed, there are a lot of positive developments, and you mentioned a few, but I think, if you look at the priority areas of funding of the EU, which is not the one you mentioned, but of the EU Commission and so on, fossil fuel subsidies, some of them are still in. And it's the case of a lot of governments. And so I think, but for looking at the whatever date we set and deciding on how we can get to a certain point, we also need to understand what is value for us. Is it just GDP growth, or is it also a sustainable way of living, an increased happiness? I mean, looking at the bright side, we can imagine a way more equitable society in a way. And the second point I wanted to highlight that you mentioned before asking the question, I promise, was in a way lobbying. So you mentioned how until now we went along with the fossil fuel industry, and we definitely did, but I think we still do. Like if we look at COP, I was amazed ahead of COP at some of the really great campaigns that activists from all over the world launched. And I'm not even doing some self-promotion because it was no one from Atlas, but you had, for example, a campaign called Polluters Out, where they lobbied and raised awareness about the fact that polluters often have the stage at COP. And as a result, COP said, okay, we won't do it this year. It's too much. Polluters won't have the stage. And then it came out that one of the largest delegations was the fossil fuel industry, and that fossil fuel industry is still having the stage. So I think definitely we see amazing lobbying endeavors that are just not working with the fossil fuel industry like you. We see a lot more awareness about the power formal and informal that the fossil fuel industry has. But I think there also needs to be a hard line from politicians at one point of, we have, for example, right now a summit called COP26 that is ongoing. Maybe those destroying the planet should not have a center stage at it, just maybe. Now, moving on to my question, as promised, let's move away from fossil fuel. So to move away from fossil fuels, we said we need to cut subsidies. That's one thing. And I'm glad you agree because it's our campaign. But so I've been doing something that I don't normally do this week, which is engage with people on Twitter, and including with very passive aggressive climate deniers. And one of the questions or feedback I got that I actually found quite interesting was, okay, but what other choice do we have than using fossil fuels? And I think that is something that a lot of people don't know about and wonder about is, do we have an alternative? So are there examples of companies, of industries, of countries that are relying, and I mean relying not for just a small proportion of their, for example, energy consumption, but for a large proportion of it? Can we actually move away from fossil fuel? Is it a thing?
Yeah, so a couple of points. Sorry, but I think what you have just said around true pricing is extremely important because it's the sort of the fundament for everything else. And it's also the fundament for fair competition, right? You can't compete on a fair basis or on a level playing field if someone is using stuff of the common good, our skies, our oceans, right, our fish, or our whatever, to transform that into private benefits or wealth, right? While someone else is taking a lot less of the common good and also trying to make a business. So in order to solve this puzzle, we need to get clarity on the values, as you just said. And I think that there's a lot of progress in that. You see it trickling down in every discipline. I've had the pleasure to contribute to a book of concurrence around competition law and sustainability. And it was all around this theme. How can you actually account for harm to the common good, to nature? So I think I'm quite positive that there is a lot of auditing, of accounting coming and underway in terms of sort of non-financial or non-directly financial values. So that's one point, and we're going to need that to transition away from fossil, because that will make it much clearer what the business case is and what the bankability is of new fossil fuel projects. Because I think there's a subtle difference in the whole debate. One is, and I've tried to say that before, and that's why I really support your guys' campaign. One is to stop subsidizing fossil, which means stop investing in it, stop banking on this being the solution for tomorrow, right? And the other one is to just phase out cold turkey from fossils. I think the first one, yes, definitely. Let's start tomorrow, right? Because the whole life cycle and investment cycle in these heavy industries is 20 to 30 years. So if we don't stop now, we're still being in the same and lock in 30 years from now. So we should definitely go cold turkey, I think, on that. And that will help the remainder of the funding will help to fund the clean tech solutions that we are working with. It will help the sustainable frontrunners, like there are LKAB and SSAB, who are together in this hybrid project that makes fossil-free steel, the members of Clean Tech for Europe, all sorts of very cool projects that we have the chance to be working with. And they can only succeed if they don't operate in a sustainable vacuum, but that they are put on the same level as the fossil-based or fossil fuel alternative processes. So that is, I think, where we need to look. We shouldn't try to convince everybody to sort of step out of fossil fuels tomorrow, because nobody's gonna okay that. Sorry.
No worries. I think we have the same bottle of water, by the way.
Yeah.
And I also bought it in Brussels, so I think we have the same one.
Not exactly the same, but similar.
Yeah. Well,
what I wanted to say, is let's try to move smartly, right? Because you're telling me about passive aggressive climate deniers. And those are the people that are actually only the tip of the iceberg. There's so much underneath, and we need to bring them all along. So we need to cut it up in very small and eatable sizes. And one of them, the first size of that salami, the salami tactics, right? The first slice of that salami should be not to invest with the taxpayers' money into things that people don't want for the future, right? And then let's see what the other slices of the salami are. And maybe it's a vegan salami, but
no, sure, that's absolutely a good point. I mean, the investing part, it's clearly something we are with our campaign. We are trying not to make clear minds, and as well probably also for people that may do some investments without even knowing which industry it's their money they are spent. So that's for sure also like another part. And but so now another point that we wanted to like address and like learn a bit more, it's about other, so like some of your clients or companies that come up to you with some of the issues. Can you like share with us some of the experiences related to, for example, challenges that they have, or instead like success stories, and how they are like managing to enter into this industry? Or for example, there is also like, taking a question coming from the audience about like, is there any framework? We know that there is, for example, big corporations that is, for example, a model used for to define a company that is more sustainable. Can you share with us something on this? I think would be great.
Yeah, first of all, going back to the last question, what can we do, in order to transition? I think one of the last things I wanted to say before sort of coughing a lot is we can all do a lot, right? So don't underestimate the power of the people in that sense. And that can be done through democracy and voting. That can be done by sort of joining Atlas and other movements. It can also be done by questioning your pension fund, right? What they invest their money in. We've seen ABP, the Dutch pension fund, stepping out of it. Yeah. So you are an actor. Yeah. You can decide which lobby firm you join. You can decide which interests you want to work for. I'm very liberal, but you have often, most of us, we have the choice between good and not so good. And I think we shouldn't, there's a move now to try and take away a little bit of the responsibility of the people because the companies have all done it and they need to solve it, etc. But don't underestimate the power that we have in questioning things, in common sense, in bringing forward common sense. So I just wanted to be clear that we can do a lot. And we should be positive about it.
But Willem, sorry for interrupting you, but just on this, don't you think it's actually very hard? And just from a personal perspective, I work on this topic. I work in this sector, and I was talking about it with some friends because we're talking about investments in general. We're looking at friends who invest a lot in cryptocurrency and all of this. And I was looking at the sustainable or the environmental impact of this. And then I actually started looking around investment portfolios to see which ones were sustainable, which ones were not sustainable, which one had parts that invested into the fossil fuel industry. And I spent a few hours doing it, and I could not find sustainable ones. It was almost impossible. So that's one thing. So I guess when you invest in your pension, you don't often, go through every single list and pick, every single investment. You have someone doing it for you. So how do you actually go about finding a sustainable one? And then it's the same with the energy sources, right? Like, I completely agree that we shouldn't take power away from people or responsibility away from people. But when you subscribe to an energy subscriber, it's extremely hard to have a green one. And it's often really way more expensive. Like, I actually have a green one and I pay a lot more. So I think it's also, and it's linked to Anita's question in the chat to also take questions from the audience. Like, can we really expect the race to the top in a way, or the, as she put it, drives to be better companies to set the tone? Or should it also come from regulators? And as a result, it's the first part of your answer to actually, set the tone and make sure that, yes, we can make those choices, but in a way that is not hyper privileged. So it's not only people with an enormous amount of time to do the research and the money who can do it.
Yeah, no, I get that. So short answers, I think don't underestimate also the power of questions, right? Maybe you don't know it, but asking your question to your broker, all right? For example, when I came to Belgium, I found that there's not a lot of offering of biological products in the supermarket. So I knew that they didn't have it at the supermarket that I went to, but I asked it every time I went, right? And I bet on the system, the capitalistic system, that at some point people would notice and expand the supply of biological products. So don't underestimate the power of just asking things and raising awareness without necessarily trying to find the solution on your own. Then moving on to your second question, which sort of dovetails nicely into the question of Marco, is what is the role of policy in this? And I think that, and how do we, yeah, I think the role of policy in this is enormous. This cannot be done without policy. And I tend to think of myself as a sort of a free market thinker, but a free market needs to be a market where there is, and that is what you said earlier, Colomb, where there is a price allotted to everything, to the whole holistic system, the use of land, the use of rivers, the use of water, the use of fish, the use of your and my skies, you know? So as long as that is not there, we need policymakers to make sure that that is the framework that competition and the market operates in. So we need policymakers. We need also leadership. And when you look at, I don't know, COP26 and in the UK and some other countries, I think there's a complete absence of leadership on this, on the way to educate people, the way to take people by the hand, the way to sort of also agree not to be the popular guy all the time or woman all the time, but also to try and sort of bite the bullet and do stuff, you know, which doesn't pay off for your next electoral cycle, but pays off for the children of our children. And I think that leadership is completely absent. I somehow see it in the European Commission and the European Parliament, which is likely to be a bit more remote from day-to-day politics. And there, and that was the sort of to answer on the questions of Marco, there's just a lot of stuff that is still not working. For example, a concrete example is that the EU ETS system is the European emissions trading system, right? Where you can trade the carbon emissions or GHG emissions that you emit as an installation, as a manufacturer. For example, a manufacturer of steel products. Part of that emission, so you think, okay, I'm emitting stuff, and if I emit more than my neighbor, I need to buy allowances to be able to emit from my neighbor, right? You would think of it as a sort of an open, fair system. What most people don't know is that the Commission, even the Commission, which is more remote from public scrutiny than maybe your Boris Johnsons or whatever, right? Even they pump into that system a lot of what they call free emission allowances. Yeah. So those are actually subsidies, fossil subsidies, to actually help companies that emit so that they don't have to buy all the emission rights that they should buy if the system were to work properly. And they have done so because they say, yeah, but then everybody will move out of Europe, coming to a point I made earlier. They just move along with the current, right? They say, yeah, we can better regulate it if we just step on board of the most polluting, lowest common denominator approach to regulating industry. We just move along, we just okay it, and then slowly we can maybe bend this river. And sorry for my children making a lot of noise in the background. But I think that is absolutely wrong. And even the European Commission, by the handing out of free allowances, is giving an enormous amount of fossil subsidies to installations in Europe. And I think we need to have more clarity on that. We need Atlas and others to bring more clarity to that even on a European level, with a Green Deal in the pocket and a revision of the EU ETS system that's currently taking place, we still bake in fossil fuel subsidies. And I think that is wrong, you know? So that is the stuff happening today. And that is the stuff that goes right to the interest of our clients, sustainable frontrunners, who cannot make their case for fossil-free steel if fossil-based steel is still being over-subsidized. And that is the harsh reality in an economic bloc that prides itself of being sort of the greenest of the green on a global level. And that is just a bit sad. And we should keep it positive, Colombe, but there's just a lot of stuff happening that still needs our attention in order to bend it in a more drastically positive way and allow for breakthrough technologies like hybrid or like the things that Clean Tech for Europe is promoting, that those get more way. But I think that is something, the free allowances under the EU ETS system, that is something that I think everybody should be aware of. And I think that there's a lot of great thinkers in the parliament, like MEP Canfin, MEP Eickhout, others that are aware of this and trying to do something with it. So there is hope. Yeah, we should help those leaders, those policy makers or those politicians that want to do the right thing. We should help them and give them our support.
Yeah, I like this hope. I think as long as it's live, there's hope, right? But let's not just rely on this. So you work with front runners, and you mentioned that they are sometimes hurt by those subsidies. And you mentioned that some parliamentarians are doing a great job in trying to find solutions. Do you have clients? Are you aware of green companies that are trying to lobby the EU or national governments into stopping this subsidizing system that makes absolutely no sense for the future? And if so, how is it going? Like, what's the feeling on the ground? Are the Commission, are the EU institutions interested or hearing, or are they kind of playing deaf?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, I think, we are representing, whether it's Novelis in the aluminium industry, whether it's DSM, and whether it's Corbion, a lot of sustainable frontrunners, right? And they are further ahead than what the EU regulation asks of them on the topics, in any case, that we are working on with them. And so things, by definition, do not move fast enough, right? Because they're already there. And the market and also the regulator is trying to play catch up, but it is not going fast enough. Why? Because there's a lot of vested interest that wants to convince us to just stay on that current that can be bent slowly into the right direction. And as long as we stay on that current that's going to be closely bent over 1 million years into the right direction, we are still forecasting. And I told you at the beginning that we have entered a different era of policymaking. We need to be backcasting. So we can't go onto that current with those incumbents, those who have had a lot of benefits from the system already, and try to easily nurture and nudge them into the right direction into an indefinite future. No, that is forecasting. That's wrong. We don't have the time to be forecasting. We should be backcasting. What needs to be done in 2030 should be leading. And you spoke, Marco, about how can you see if companies take that serious. I think Science-Based Targets Initiative, if you don't know that, is one of the key things that is also important for us. That is actually helping us to understand, is that backcasting being done serious in a company, right? Are those targets that they put up for themselves, are they science-based, and are they working back from 2030 or 2050 or the Paris Agreement or whatever, right? But it is backcast. Yeah. Anyone that's not backcasting now, but is forecasting, is doing the wrong thing. And that is a bit, I think that is a bit how you can, in a very easy way, determine, are people going down the right track, or I call it right track, or are people just trying to sort of put up a lot of smoke and mirrors to just muddle on and see that they can enjoy the ride for as long as they can, basically taking a free ride on the rest of society, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I totally agree with you, William. I think that kind of like future, backward kind of like, thinking, it's really game changer for this. You can have like kind of clearer actions on what you have to do, and a better plan as well, instead of like, forecasting that is much, sometimes it's just, thinking or like planning without much, ground or really a plan. But since we're conscious of time as well, we wanted to ask you also a question about the about more like any positive takeaways that we can take from COP related to this topic. If you heard anything that you want to share, if you followed it, it will be great to, also for the audience to get any positive takeaway related to fossil fuels.
Yeah, no, as I said, I think the European Investment Bank that committed to end financing fossil fuel energy sources, I think, is the major sort of positive takeaway for now, for the first week in any case. I think it's positive that not only the EIB has put up that commitment, but also I think more than 20 governments and national development banks have ultimately supported that. And that is sort of I think, the greatest takeaway for me now, which is the most sort of concrete one. Another one is, of course, another greenhouse gas that we have heard a lot about recently is methane. We saw the methane pledge, which I think is very positive. We're working also with companies like, for example, DSM, that have very good solutions to curb methane emissions. So I think there is some good stuff coming out of the COP, and we should hold on to that. But yeah, I wish I could end this whole session more positively, but if you do the math, if you add up all the pledges, if you add up all the initiatives, you come still to a 2.7 degrees warming by the end of the century. And I just think that is unacceptable. So I hope that Atlas, Colombe, and Andrea, and you guys can bring the people out there, because I think we're going to a different sort of activism, not only trying to consume less ourselves, but also to mobilize the stakeholders of tomorrow. And I think that is incredibly positive. And I take great example of what you guys are doing. And I think that if everyone, when waking up, thinks what he or she in their 9-to-5 job can do better, like we've done with sustainable public affairs in the lobbying sector, then we must be moving to a more positive world. So let's end on that positive note.
No, absolutely. So we want to ask you like one call to action for the activists at the moment. I guess it's what you mentioned, right? So for stakeholder engagement, and also what we do in Atlas. But anything else that you would add to this, like to all the activists that are listening that want like simply change the world? Anything else that you think we should be doing, or like help to contribute to this campaign and also beyond?
Yeah, I think remain grateful for what we have and where we are in the world today, and certainly Europe without any wars, right? And with our children that have been growing up in peace and prosperity. So let's be grateful for what we have, but let's see that as a very strong basis for change, because I think it is, well, Andrea, you are the Italian amongst us, but I think it's, Il Gattopardo, right? One of my favorite books.
I'm also Italian as well. So
oh, you're also Italian, Marco.
Yeah.
In which Tancredi says, for everything to stay the same, everything must change. And I think that is, if there's anything that we can learn, that if we want this prosperity and this peace to thrive, everything must change.
Well, thanks, William, for this last. For sure, we'll try to to do what you suggest on this. So yeah, just to close a little bit this session, that was very interesting, this town hall. So I mean, we heard your points. So there is hope in general. I believe there is hope, despite some of the bad news coming from COP or other news about subsidies that are not yet. Still some countries subsidizing that. We believe there is hope, and William, you shared that some companies are actually leading the way forward, and we should then keep pressuring other private companies and as well some countries and other countries to keep working on this, and as citizens, so questioning and paving the way forward. So before everyone leaves, I think there's another thing we would like to ask, as we have launched a campaign exactly on banning fossil fuels. I think that you could do the right thing by signing as well this campaign and help us to spread the word even more, and try to put pressure on governments and on companies to use less subsidies. And the reason for this, we mentioned it already today, but fossil fuels are, just to summarize, are contributing for a lot to the CO2 emissions, around, as Colm said at the beginning, around 89 to 90%. And however, since in 2020, around $6 trillion were given in subsidies, and it's forecasted that in 2025 they will even increase. So because of this, so the trend seems like that is not even decreasing or being the same, but even increasing. So because of this, really fossil fuels must stay in the ground as much as possible. And if we work on this and stop fossil fuel subsidies, we can even reach reduce a third of the global CO2 emissions. So that's something that would be a really high impact, and that's the reason why from Atlas we decided to launch this campaign, and hopefully many of you that are listening are also signing our campaign and spreading the word as much as possible. So having said this, I thanks William for participating today, and all the attendees, and yeah, we'll keep up the work on this and on many other campaigns.
Thanks, Marco. And everyone, if you still have questions, I know we didn't manage to answer everything. I'm sure Willem will be willing to interact online as well if you comment under the posts and on Twitter. So it's not the end of the conversation. Share online your favorite hopeful moments, since it was a very positive talk. At least on my side, I don't necessarily have that many positive talks. So thank you, Willem, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thanks, Willem. Thanks everyone.
Keep up the good work.